One of the words that we haven't used yet to kind of describe what the old covenant was about is maturity, right? And I think we've been getting at that point, but like to your point earlier, you were under custody. They were under this custody, right? And it's a child that's under custody,
right?
And they can't be an heir and take over the business,
right,
until they've matured. Right. And Paul gets into that there later in Galatians, and he talks about like when you grow up, you have the opportunity to either be the heir to the household,
right,
or to live as though you're still under custody, which is the same as living as a slave.
Right.
Right.
100%.
And so this was about maturing his people. We already mentioned this once today, is God doesn't do anything immediate. Mm-hmm. He prepares us for it. He works us through it. He grows us through it. He matures us in it, right? So like some people look at the old covenant and say, oh, look at these laws for slavery.
Right.
God was pro-slavery.
Right.
But when you really take a step back and you look at it,
right,
this was nothing like what the Israelites or the Hebrews were submitted to under Egypt. 100%. This is nothing like what anybody else was doing around them, and this is nothing like what the United States did just in the last even 200 years.
Sure, most
right. This is completely different.
Always different.
It's always different, and it's a step towards reconciliation and a life without slavery. Right. And it's what eventually leads to the people who were abolitionists.
Right. 100%.
Right. So. And even in the New Testament, by the time we're in the New Testament, Paul is telling, is it Philemon?
Yeah.
He's like, hey, I could tell you, I could come out right and say to you, stop owning this person.
Right.
But I am instead going to appeal to Christ in you.
I'm going to try to encourage the Holy Spirit with it. But I think, isn't that interesting? Because I think like all of those arguments, like the goal is always to get back to the garden.
Yeah.
Not to get back to Moses. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's really important for us to understand, is the goal is to get back to one-on-one community walking and talking. Like that is what, I mean, and I always look at the Bible as, cyclical in this way. Like we end in the garden. Like there's a new heaven and a new earth and God walks among us. Like literally that's what happened in the beginning. You know what I mean? And so the beginning, it's a Quentin Tarantino movie. You know what I mean? Like it starts at the end and we were, that kind of, but like that's what like,
right now
our goal.
Right now we're just stuck in the middle with you.
Right. Yeah. But that's our goal. And so like, I think we have to be careful here for legalistic sake.
Yeah.
Because a lot of us want to go back to the legalistic side of this. That's you're not going back far enough. You know what I mean?
Right.
God was never a legalist.
Right.
God had one rule: don't eat that one because it's good for you. I promise you.
Right.
That you don't need that. Rely on me to tell you what the knowledge of let me tell you what is good. And then like you said a couple episodes back, like how dare you tell me what I can't do? And now look where we're at. And now we go back to how dare you tell me what you can and can't do. By the way, I'm not going to go back to the freedom part. I'm going to go back to the law part, and I'm going to tell you why your law's wrong.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
So see, it's weird how that happens.
It's a flawed argument. It's a fallacy.
It is. It's a fallacy, 100%.
Yeah. So one of the things that Paul says here too is he says that the law was introduced on account of violations. And if you think about that, this is going back to kind of what you were saying. It's not about the law because the law didn't exist.
Right.
What's he talking about? He's talking about the moral law. 100%. Right? Now, the moral law is kind of encapsulated in the Ten Commandments, but those didn't exist either.
No.
He's talking about the law that should be evident to every man, woman, and child because we are image bearers of God.
Right.
Right? Like, this is something that a skeptic will say today is, well, I don't need the Bible to tell me that murder's wrong.
Right.
Right? You're right, you don't.
Yeah.
And yet, people still commit murder.
And yet Cain killed Abel.
And yet Cain,
Yeah. God probably was like, seriously, guys? Like, come on. We can't even get one generation.
Exactly. Yeah. So the problem here is that the people were ignoring the evident moral law.
Right.
Right.